Peace, my people. You're tuning into I Must Be Buggin', where Black, gifted, and otherwise neurodivergent folks celebrate our special flavors. If you've ever questioned your perspective in a world built for the masses, welcome home. I'm your host, Sheldon Gay, and I appreciate you joining me on this journey as a late-identified Black, gifted man. Together, we'll rewrite the script on neurodiversity by celebrating our differences, challenging the status quo, and breaking free from old narratives that label us as deficient. In each episode, we'll explore the stories, experiences, and of course the curiosities of Black gifted adults and other neurodivergent people who are underrepresented or unidentified in a world where normal can also mean harmful. So continue with me on this journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and acceptance. I Must Be Buggin' is creating safe spaces, sparking conversations, and making sure our voices are heard. Welcome to the latest episode of I Must Be Buggin'. I am your host, Sheldon Gay. I cannot tell you what it means to be back and sharing some more content with you all. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for checking this out. If this is your first time, absolutely thank you. Hope that you enjoy this session. Also, feel free to go back, check out the old episodes. And also very, very special thank you to those of you who have been reaching out and just letting me know that you've been hearing me speak here, you've been hearing me speak on other podcasts, and just telling me how much this work means to you. It means the world to me to hear that. Sometimes it can feel like I'm speaking into a vacuum, that, I think I've said this before, right? That sometimes it's hard to know that the work is really reaching people. And so every time you reach out and you tell me about how this has impacted you, how it's impacted someone that you know, how it's helped you see, yourself and others in a different way. It means, like I said, just a lot. So thank you for that. With that, let me kind of jump in a little bit. And again, if this is your first time, welcome to the way that I like to start off and welcome people into the space. My name is Sheldon Gay. I am currently a 43-year-old Black man. I have curly black hair. I have black in-ear earbuds. I'm sorry. Right now, I have light brown skin. I have a mustache and a little tuft of hair that I always like to call a goatee. I am currently wearing a gray shirt of my design, which says, it references the desire to turn our wounds into wisdom. I wore this today because it's very, very relevant to today's conversation. Behind me is a series of black bricks, and I think that's it. Oh yeah, sorry, I use pronouns he and him. Okay. And so with that, I'll move to the next thing that I want to make sure that I share as well. Is, again, please, if this is meaningful to you all, if you've liked a previous episode, please do like, share, and leave a rating. I'm asking that, with a calm voice, but I'm very, very earnest in that request. This helps spread the message. This helps to get, to grow this community, right? And to help people hear me speak in this way that, means something to you, right? So share this with other folks. Again, in particular, like if you're not necessarily comfortable sharing it with other folks, please do, leave me a good rating. That helps with the all-seeing algorithm. And so that will at least organically, right, help other people find this kind of content. And so please do that. Okay. And so, yeah, let's kind of just hop into it a little bit. Instead of what many may think we start with, which is typically a bell hooks quote, today we're going to start with a James Baldwin quote. And the quote is, "The longer I live, the more deeply I learn that love, whether we call it friendship or family or romance, is the work of mirroring and magnifying each other's light." And so today we are going to talk about mirroring, right, and what it means to be a mirror for others. And this is distinctly different than what we've talked about before, or you may have heard me speak about on other podcasts, where that mirroring can also be where you show up in a space and you see others who, act or just share similar beliefs and behaviors and needs, and it helps you to feel less alone, right? So there's this mirroring effect. That's not what we're talking about today. Mirroring today is much more about how we can see in others lessons that we have for ourselves, and how conversely we can do that for other people, right? And so the impetus for this is because recently I've had multiple occasions to reflect on relationships, whether they be platonic or otherwise, right? To investigate, for example, why everyone seems to be looking for peace, right? And the cool people. Everyone wants to be hanging with the cool people, but yet so few of us, right, can truly claim to have found those people. It's about this opportunity to ask why some things, some relationships, right, last longer than others. And think about why we hold on to some things longer than maybe we should, and why sometimes we actually end up self-sabotaging, right, unwittingly or otherwise, because we tell ourselves things matter that really are just about protecting us from the risk of relationship, right? And so this led me to consider lots of different questions, in particular questions like, how much should we be worried about how other people view us, right? What are they thinking about us? How much should we really spend time on that? Should we be trying to get other people to change? Why does it seem like we keep running into the same kinds of people, right? And if everyone, again, is claiming to be surrounded only by problematic or at least annoying people, if everyone's saying that, then why is it so hard, right, to bump into someone else who seems normal, right? Um, or at least agreeable or pleasant or, again, cool, right? I know that normal word can be a challenging subject for me and for others. So I offer those alternatives. Um, but all this brings me back to, right, the sneaky theme of this season, which, right, is about it's them, not me, right? This idea that the reason why I'm having these problems is just because of, again, my surrounding world. Somebody's not acting right, somebody's not listening, somebody's not understanding, somebody's not behaving right. The things that we want them to do, or sorry, things that we want to happen are not happening the way that we would like for them to, right? And so that's the problem. That's what's wrong with my life. Um, but again, the season is about saying, yes, there may be challenges that we face, but like, what part do I hold, right? What part am I responsible for? What part can I, leverage my control over? Um, and again, a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about that without really, thinking about the external world without really considering what's happening within them. And it's an interesting thing, right? Because when we've spent all this time looking for something in all the expected places and we're not finding our answers, it would seem that we should then be looking in the unexpected places. Unfortunately, when that unexpected place is inside of us or in the mirror, um, that's tough work. And not everyone is skilled enough, has the capacity or the resources to really do that work in a meaningful way. And so I'm offering this as a path to, begin that conversation within yourself. Because it's easy to point fingers at other people. But again, a lot of life is about realizing how many times we really just need to take responsibility for what we can do and move on take responsibility for what we can do, and let go of these external expectations and beliefs, because that's where a lot of the suffering comes in. Um, and so again, it takes time to look in the mirror and see again who who's across from me, right? And what is it? What are these lessons that you know I have the opportunity to learn? And to be fair and absolutely crystal clear, right? We have external needs like food, water, shelter, right? These fundamental human needs that we need just for survival. And so we're not really talking about that part. However, what we are talking about is this, this beauty of life, that the things that we really, really need, right, on a like mind, body, soul, like metaphysical level, those things are those things that can be achieved without any material wealth, or you know, luckily without anyone having to change anything, right? Anyone else having to be different, having to show up different, having to apologize, having to do any of those different things, right? That's the beauty of it. And so those are the things that again that are really at the core of our needs beyond those like survival level needs, right? And so I think that this is why so many systems are focused on those fundamental needs, because once we stop worrying about those, we have the time to go and look and consider those needs that then we realize are not bound by these systems. And so the systems want us to be focused on the things that they do control, so that we then never get to the point where we realize we don't need those systems, that we don't need the externalities. Um, but that's a conversation for another day, but it's an important you know point that I'd like to put out there, right? Because ultimately we all are looking for some core basic things, right? To know that we're loved, and certainly that we're worthy of love, to not feel alone and be literally disconnected from the world, right? We want to feel like we're a part of something, that we're not just this mass, this object that the world doesn't care about or even notice. Um, to that end, we want to be seen, particularly as we are, or at least as we imagine ourselves to be. And so when these things get out of sync, a lot of bad things happen, right? That's when we start to feel our deepest sadness, our deepest hopelessness, and our deepest despair. And so, again, let's talk a little bit about what a mirror is. And quite literally, a mirror, right, is a reflective surface we can use to observe the world from a different angle. Um, mirrors can help us feel loved, connected, and seen by showing us who we are in real time, right? And demonstrating that, like, when I move my arm, I see my arm moving in the mirror. So, like, I'm real. I am, right? It helps us see ourselves in a way that takes us outside of this mental, this cranial cockpit that we, otherwise experience life through, right? All of a sudden, when we look into a mirror, we know that again, we are, we're not just a consciousness, right? And in fact, it helps to make that consciousness tactile, right? Almost. One of the things that they talk about is that the development of a child, that in the development of a child, a major stage is when they can look in a mirror and recognize that again, that what they're looking at is not some foreign object or creature or some sort of thing, some sort of extension of their parents or a trick that their parents are pulling, but it's them, right? And so once that happens for all of us, right? And even for those who are not able to see, when we encounter um, an experience that takes us from being just a thought to having again this sort of multidimensional, right, this tactile, this tangible consciousness, that's when life changes. And it moves us from capital S self to starting to see this lowercase self, right? And if you don't know what I mean by that, go back and listen to my episode called "It Must Be My Ego," um, and that will begin to make sense. Um, but again, one of the things about a mirror is that it simply shows what it sees, right? It has no judgment. It doesn't it doesn't tell any story aside from what is in front of it. And if you don't like what you see in that mirror, that's your own judgment. That's your own perception. It's not the mirror, right? The mirror doesn't tell us that that's ugly, or the mirror doesn't tell us that that's too skinny or too overweight or whatever, right? The mirror doesn't tell us that. We tell ourselves that. And sure, again, there are some funhouse mirrors that kind of distort the image. And, in the larger scheme of things, that might be even a better metaphor, because one of the things that we have to be mindful of is understanding the mirror that we're looking at, to know that maybe, again, there are some bends and twists and stretchings that are a reflection of, right, they're the nature of the mirror and not of who we are. And so when we see those things, we can still take truth from them, right? They're still reflecting back who we are, but we can kind of know, okay, that's making, things much smaller than what they are. When I think about it, I've always got to kind of know that I got to stretch it out, right, to make it be more accurate to what's really happening. And so, you know, as we continue to move on and dig deeper into this, let's go back, excuse me, and revisit that Baldwin quote, right? And so the Baldwin quote again is, "The longer I live, the more deeply I learn that love, whether we call it friendship, family, or romance, is the work of mirroring and magnifying each other's light." And so, I think what Baldwin again is getting at here is that there's a path to our desired relationships, right? The desire of our relationships being the extent to which we can encounter joy and connection. And that path is not through our ability to define or control someone else, right? It's not through prioritizing, right, what they bring to the table or do for us, but rather how readily we're able to see that person's light and help them see it, right? And it's often that we do that by making that light so large and unmissable that it changes the light and dark that they see within themselves, right? And again, this isn't to say that relationships are about pleasing people or all about others, right? Or, it's certainly not about simply telling people what they want to hear. However, they are about being adept at helping people see the things that many of us struggle to spend time on, to focus on, right? Things that help us affirm our inherent value and our prospects for hope. And to do that effectively, conversely, it may take clearing out, right? Some of the things that we are, too familiar with, the things that cause us to ruminate, right, about our mistakes and build narratives of despair. And so the challenge is that most don't see the water because they're too busy swimming. And what I mean by that is that there's often times when we're so busy trying to become something, we're so busy trying to please, we're so busy trying to do these things that we can't even see what it is that's around us. We can't even be fully present with where we are, right? And so to love others is to help them see all of it, to be present with it all, while prioritizing the focus, right, on the light. And this brings me then to another favorite Baldwin quote of mine, which says, "If I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things you don't see." And so again, these things may be things that you don't even know are positively special about you and that you, therefore, take for granted. It can also mean offering compassionate perspective on the ways that you're keeping yourself stuck in a revolving door because you just don't have the awareness to adjust your gaze just enough to see the door to exit. right? And so to execute this, you know, shared space in a meaningful way, it does take a lot of care, a lot of vulnerability, and a lot of grace, but it can be done. And so the key point that I'm trying to make here is that loving someone isn't just about the joy and the ease, right? Loving people is about welcoming growth and healing, both which take energy and reconfiguring no matter which way you look at it, right? Even if it was a wound that needed to heal, like a literal wound that needed to heal, it would take energy and it would take reconfiguring for that process to take place. And so one of the things that we have to be mindful about is accepting growth and healing showing up as a part of the process, rather than, uh, FBI agents showing up, right, as agents of no, right? Um, if we think about them in that way as part of the process, it gives us more space to assess and address things much more clearly. When things get tough, that may be time to put in extra work. Um, I think about those times, and I'm sure many of you have done this, right? When you first start working out, man, your body feels like trash, right? Your arms ache, your legs ache, your back aches, all these different things. And we could take that as a sign I need to stop or slow down, right? But if we never pushed ourselves, we would never see the benefits. And so, your body may be saying to you, what the figgity are you doing, right? Like, I'm not used to this. I'm not comfortable with this. But the more that keep your commitments to pushing through to get to that lesson, get to that beauty, again, that's when you really can get to the essence and the benefits of everything. And so, again, let me take time to pause, and say, like, obviously there are limits, right? And clearly unloving, if not dangerous things that people can be doing or experiencing, right? That we should always find ways to separate ourselves from. And that's a different conversation. I will say that, in any way that we are approaching a gray area where our boundaries meet our capacity for grace, we should always remember that a boundary isn't about precluding connection, right? It's about protecting it. And so if you're in relationship with someone, whether that be a friend, family, or otherwise, and they can't make space for that boundary, then it's no longer a gray area, right? They've kind of made the decision for you. And that's kind of the beauty of truly being able to explore, express, and hold a boundary. One of the things, for example, that I read to myself every day is that, it's an affirmation that I say, my community respects my boundaries. And this is a lesson that I've had to learn and ingrain in myself in recent years, because, I've done a lot of self-abandonment. I've realized that proximity and even proclamations of commitment don't equate safety. And as much grace as I have to give, again, I'm still learning about the pains and the trouble with abandoning myself to prove that I have that level of grace, right? And how that isn't healthy or helpful to me. Because in the end, I'm the one that ends up holding the bag, and it ends up being, a flaming bag of elephant dung, right? And so no one wants to be holding that. So, when I think about myself then as being a mirror, I've and how I show up for other people, and simply, again, just reflect back what I'm seeing, I realize that this work, this presence, this mindset is not for the weak. It takes a lot of self-awareness and the ability to self-regulate. Because again, as I said earlier, a mirror doesn't judge, it just reflects. And so when people enter our space and touch on old wounds or project their stuff onto us, it takes a certain level of skill to distinguish between what is theirs and what is ours, right? And to make sure that we're staying centered on the fact that we can't be tempted to defend our position, right? Or prioritizing defending our position or escalating the situation. And when we do get to the space where we realize that our compulsion to justify and explain our thoughts and actions is often rooted in trauma and not a place of self acceptance and validation, we can then start to make a seismic shift, right? If I take time, as again, my shirt talks about, right, to heal my wound, to turn my wounds into wisdom, I'm no longer worried about someone trying to pour salt into my wound because it's healed. It's just salt in my arm or salt in my leg, right? It's not, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to protect. If I can take time to validate myself first and foremost, I'm no longer waiting for someone to give me that attention, no longer waiting for someone to give me that validation. I'm no longer disappointed if they don't because I'm not looking for that from them, right? Instead, I'm able to then hear what's being shared and see more clearly, again, when those old wounds and vulnerable parts of me are showing up, and then put them in their rightful place. And then I can simply be a mirror and reflect back and enhance the light while showing as well the darkness. We no longer have to, have this compulsion to make people see how they're the bad one or see their faults, right? That's not, when I talk about sharing, expressing the darkness, I'm really talking about creating spaces where the compassion for those tender areas, the compassion for those emptinesses within them can be shown back to them to say, hey, like, maybe you don't even realize this is here, but here's a space that you need to fill with light. Or maybe you do realize this is here, and I want for you to know that I also see it and that I want to put light into that space, or I want you to have the capacity and help support you in gaining capacity to put light in that space, which is, again, a very different thing. A lot of people are still in that process where they're still trying to kind of just point the finger at the darkness and, because they want that person to know that they are a dark person, right? But the reality is that when we kind of do the work right, and reach a certain level of skill, our silence, our patience, and our compassion in the face of that adversity will tell the story, right? The dark parts of them will recognize the light that you're shining by making them aware of the absence of that light that they have. And so, to be clear, what I mean is, in this case, the good, the bad, the frustrating, even the endearing, right? We see in others as a reflection of what we have going on inside of us. This does not mean that other people's actions are a reflection of what we've done or what we've said and how valuable we are. It also doesn't mean that if someone does something that harms us, it's only on us to reflect. However, if what we find ourselves doing is spending most of our time wondering why the rest of the world is broken or isn't as good as us or just doesn't understand or, right, then there's an opportunity for us to look in the mirror and ask, what is this telling us about ourselves, right? When was the last time that I checked in with my capacity for compassion, right? When are we taking time to be curious about other ways of being, right? And our way isn't always the right way or the only way, right? So how often are we really considering and validating that other people's ways of being is okay? Where might we simply need to reclaim our power by choosing not to associate with that person or thing, right? If that person or thing is refusing to change, if that person or thing is not honoring us or bringing joy into our lives, as tough as it is, instead of sitting there wanting them to change and see us and give us the thing that we need, how often are we saying, you know what? I need to, again, hold this boundary and separate myself. One of the things that I've fully affirmed about myself is that I'm not just a mirror. I'm like an ever contrasting color, right? And what I mean by that is, even without conscious effort, my way of being can create an awareness for others of how they are, the things that they don't really consider or didn't even realize were different or didn't even consider that they could do, right? There's ways in which I operate and people like me operate that make people aware of a power or again a way of being that they never thought they could claim. Again, sometimes that's because they never considered it, and sometimes it's because they were afraid of doing it because maybe somebody told them that they couldn't, right? That wasn't the correct way, that wasn't the normal way, that wasn't the acceptable way. And so to see other people freely living these lives that again you were told are unacceptable, that you desire but you feel like you don't have access to, can be a tough thing, right? And so, um, I've recently likened them. Sorry, right? Recently likened this. I'm sorry to the thought that you're standing next to someone, and both are wondering, and one of you wonders out loud, like, does the fish even realize they're in water? And this goes back to kind of the metaphor that I was using earlier, right? But then the question becomes, even as humans, do we realize that we are in our own medium, right? Which is air, right? Like air is our water. And how often do we even consider that? Um, and so even just like I said, those kinds of thoughts, that kind of thinking, right, is just a strange thing for people. But the ability to detach, step back, and think about your thinking is a very, very powerful tool. My mind and my life experiences have afforded me lots of practice in doing this. I know I'm not the only one. And again, there are many of us, right? But it's still a rare thing. And it often feels like a burden because, again, how many people are sitting around thinking about themselves akin to fish? You know, people don't want their record scratched, right? And yet there are those of us who are always bumping into other people's tables. And so for those of you who are too young or too unaware of vinyl, look up bumping into the record stand, or bumping into a record player. Take that offline and do that. But for those of us who know what that means, again, there are those of us who are bumping into tables all the time. Again, not on purpose, and that obviously is an upsetting experience. And I can say that this was at the heart of my gifted self-discovery, right? I kept wondering why other people didn't get it, why they didn't care as much, or refused to, admit seemingly self-evident truths. And so it was in taking a step back to consider that this might be telling me something about myself, right? That I started to learn more, right? And that's a scary thought, right? Because on the other side of the inquiry of like, could there be something up with me, might be yes, right? A yes. Um, you know, was I about to find out that I really was being extra or unreasonable? Right? Would I have to look back and, clutch my pearls at the thought of all the harm I'd been causing while thinking that I was actually helping people? And, obviously I'm not, infallible. And so there were things that I realized that I could have done differently, said differently, right? But fundamentally, what I realized was that, after all this thorough and vulnerable investigation, is that I saw that the way that I moved through the world wasn't really the problem, or at least wasn't my problem, right? Society has conditioned us to be afraid and defensive when someone shows up in ways that makes us question our abilities, right? And so someone like me can be that person. I remember when I used to work in corporate, the last job that I had, um, they kind of made fun of me for using big words. And I promise you, I legit at the time had no idea what they were talking about. I was very surprised by this, right? But then again, and looking back upon reflection, I suddenly realized that the words that weren't necessarily particularly special to me were thesaurus words for other people, right? And this is when, again, my entire world started to shift and finally kind of like lock into place, because so many strange things now just fit, and it made sense. And it was through this ability to realize that people are our mirrors, right? Because if I'm seeing all these people who are having challenges with the words that I use, I could be stuck at like level one, which is don't tease me or learn some words even, right? I could get into that anger, right? And just say, why don't you all just learn some more words? But like when you do the work and you move to another space, right, another level of capacity, then you start to say, okay, maybe again, I am someone whose vocabulary is um, more extensive, and what would that feel like? How do I how do I offer compassion in this moment, or at least how do I better understand that this isn't about me, right? And I don't take it personally anymore. If people still want to feel some type of way about it, again, I have the opportunity to just leave, right? But now, what I definitely don't have to do is to feel, like I said, a personal attack, and now I've got to kind of like push back. I don't have that anymore, right? I realize that I don't have it, as a kid say, right? I don't have any ops. I don't have just a world that's continuously feigning ignorance, right? I don't have people who are trying to play me. It's that there's this difference. There's something about me that I can learn and, navigate the world much more effortlessly and peacefully, because now I understand what's going on. And so this brings us to talking a little bit about triggers, right? And the role that they play in what we see in the mirror. So triggers are the spots on our hearts that remember a time when we felt unsafe and unloved. They can cause us to revert back to that first time, right? When we felt that way, probably as a child. And we can't help whether or not we're triggered necessarily, right? Because we don't control what's happening around us and what memories may come up. And so I'm not sure that that's an attainable goal, or even one that we should want to try to attain, right? Because our feelings are always valid. Our feelings are always trying to give us the opportunity to learn something again about ourselves. So I think that the goal instead should be, how do we learn to better process and respond when those things show up, right? And so I know for me, again, to go back to my gifted self-discovery journey, the spark that lit a fire in me to do this deep self-investigation was that I realized that I was consistently getting frustrated with some very, very specific things. I was generally a very laid back person. I'm sure that you can, if you listen to this podcast, right, like you can see that my energy is generally, just very laid back. But there were certain things that really, really, you know, really, really, as some folks say, irked me, right? Really, really irritated me. And I didn't even, I generally don't let things get me too high or too low. However, there were things that, again, really just got me upset. And so for years, I went external. I started investigating. Let me understand people, right? Let me understand their motivations. Let me understand what this is meaning to them, right? Um, and that took my empathy to, an elite level. The question, that isn't necessarily being spoken and saying that, though, is how much empathy did I end up having for myself first. Um, to that end, right? This is part of the frustration, because people would still be upset with me, even though I would be expressing empathy for what they were going through. And so this was super frustrating, because it's like, okay, well, I feel like I'm in between a rock and a hard place, right? Um, if what you want is to feel heard or to be understood, and I'm offering that, and you're still upset, then what am I to do? Because I don't want to sit here and argue with you. I'm trying to build community. I'm trying to be in community with you. I'm trying to be, you know, your friend. Excuse me. And so when I realized that I couldn't do any more work, or much more work externally, I went and looked inside. Um, and so I realized that, yeah, if people are telling me that I'm moving too fast, or I'm too intense, and all this kind of stuff, right? That maybe I was moving at a pace that was significantly faster. I was sharing things that were much more deep and complex than others. Again, I saw myself as equals with everyone, and more so equivalents. Like, we're all equal, period, right? But equivalent we are not. And Obviously, or maybe not obviously, but this, to be clear, the distinction there being that there's no human who's better than the other person, that has more value than the other person, but we are all different. We're not equivalent. Some people are taller, shorter, you know, better at math, um, better at communicating, whatever. I don't know, right? Like there's any number of ways in which we're not equivalent, but we are still equals. And so I always just saw myself as just someone just like everyone else. So it was hard to perceive and accept the fact that other people couldn't just do what I was doing. And so it was when I allowed myself to think that and believe that things began to change, right? And so now, you know, again, I was no longer triggered by these things. I was no longer caught up in these things because it made sense. Um, you know, I could then, one, again, offer more capacity because I know that it would feel tough to have someone who's constantly like working at a pace that um, is faster than yours, particularly in a world that again prioritizes and ways of being that are um, driven by what capitalistic society rewards, right? And so again, at the end of the day, like the speed of something doesn't always actually matter, but it can feel like it does because if everything in society is driven by who's supposedly the fastest, the smartest, the whateverist, right? Then someone showing up and kind of making you reflect and do a comparison can be tough. And so again, realizing this allowed me to offer compassion and kind of like get away from even worrying about that. Um, but it also made me realize that I need to seek out more people who are better aligned when it comes to that depth and complexity, and right, and that would bring me more joy and those other people more joy, and we could take off any of us worrying about that comparison aspect and simply sit with each other, right? um we could really again do work on healing and honoring and protecting our inner child because we're not sitting there worried about how someone else is going to react. And so that brings me to a poem that I'm almost certain that I've shared here before. I'm going to take a quick sip. If you are not watching this on YouTube, I just took a sip from my Philadelphia Flyers cup. Shout out to the Flyers. But anyway, let me share this Rumi poem that I've shared with folks before, and many of you probably have heard before, called The Guest House. It says, "This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows, who violently sweep your house and empty it of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door, laughing, and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond." And I absolutely love this poem because, again, I think what many of us miss is that all of our emotions, they're not only valid, but they're all trying to get us to look at something, to take an action, to learn more about who we are. And so being a mirror, you know, for other people, and understanding that people are our mirrors, the things that we're seeing in them, right, are giving us an opportunity to learn something about how we're thinking and feeling about ourselves. Excuse me. And so again, we often think that the goal is to push past emotions, that get tougher to hold. But if that's all we do, then we miss out on the lessons that they're here to teach us. Um, you know, this process detaches us from the need to control or change their actions, right? Because now we're not worried about whether or not is worried about whether they're going to make us feel a certain thing or whether that thing is going to impact us emotionally, right? Because we're not bound by those anymore. Whatever's going to come up, we welcome that opportunity, right? Um, you know, how tolerant, for example, are we if we're constantly wondering why people aren't the way that we think they should be, just because it makes us more comfortable? Like, we shouldn't be here trying to control the world just so that we can be more comfortable. We have to get comfortable with that discomfort because, again, it can be teaching us something that then allows us to become more expansive and to receive the things that we feel that we're being denied currently. And so, I've started to embrace my role as a mirror, by making sure that my surface is as clean and unwarped as possible, right? Um, I if I'm sharing something with someone, um, either overtly or just indirectly by my presence, I want to make sure that, again, I'm not projecting any of my stuff. I'm simply just reflecting back. Um, and there will be times where they blame the mirror, right? For showing them that blemish or the extra weight that they're carrying. But I can't hold on to that. I can't be concerned with that. The best that I can do is adjust slightly, right, to shine the light back in a way that allows them to focus on the parts of them that they already love or didn't realize helps them stand out. It's all work. It's not easy. However, it is rewarding, right? And so I will round out this conversation with a few more quotes. So the first one is: the good you find in others is in you too. The faults you find in others are your faults as well. After all, to recognize something, you must know it. The beauty you see around you is your beauty. See the best in others, and you will be your best. Give to others, and you give to yourself. Appreciate beauty, and you will be beautiful. Admire creativity, and you will be creative. Love, and you will be loved. Seek to understand, and you will be understood. Listen, and your voice will be heard. And that is from an unknown author. And this is a special one for those of us who, again, are very introspective, always self-reflecting, right? Who are just taking that time to do that really important work. And it says, if you are someone who self-reflects, you should be very aware of something. Most people don't. They project. It's an important awareness because you might self-reflect on their projections, thinking that they too are self-reflecting. You can get lost in this loop of self-questioning based on people gaslighting you or inducing self-doubt simply because they are unable to turn the mirror towards themselves. So before you consider what someone says to you about yourself, first of all, be sure that it comes from a person who is not only able to take accountability for themselves, but is also in a state of mind of trying to understand you. Understand that many people are not willing to turn the mirror to themselves and don't care if they induce self-doubt and mental fog in you, as long as it helps them get away from their own wrongdoing. Not to forget those who know you are someone who self-reflects and are simply using it against you to manipulate you. Self-awareness is a beautiful thing, but that being said, awareness is just as important in order to not fall into other people's toxic traps. And this is from sorry, I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong. A-line Frisch? Forgive me. um, and the last quote is: people don't see you as they are. They see you as they are. People don't see you as you are. They see you as they are. Sorry, I'm not sure if I said that correctly the first time. This is why things aren't personal. The more we take things personally, the more we suffer. Have self-dignity, respect, and boundaries, but don't give your life perceptions to people who don't even understand themselves. Focus on you. And this is from J. Mike Fields. And so with that, I end this conversation. I thank you so much for listening. Again, if any part of this has resonated with you, please leave a rating. It really means a lot. Please share this with someone. I look forward to the next time that we're able to talk. I've already kind of got that planned out, so hopefully that'll also be out pretty soon. But yeah, thank you so much. I hope that you, again, have learned something about how to be a mirror and why it's so important. See you the next time. Thanks. Thank you for joining me for another episode of I Must Be Bugging. I hope you've learned something, became curious, and most importantly, felt affirmed by what you heard. Remember, this podcast is all about sharing compassionate narratives about who we are and how we contribute to the beautiful and necessary diversity of humanity. This is our place to unmask and just be. Don't forget to connect with me on IG at I Must Be Buggin', where I'm eager to see you share your thoughts, your experiences, and your stories. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Leave a review and subscribe. It helps others who are eager for community find our people. So thank you again for being a part of the I Must Be Buggin' community. I can't wait for the next episode. Until then, stay up and enjoy who you were meant to be. And remember, you're not bugging, you're brilliant.